The rusted crowbar slipped from my trembling hands as I stared at the gold bars gleaming beneath the shattered concrete, each one stamped with the Nazi eagle $175 million of blood money that would either save my dying daughter or destroy what was left of my soul. 3 months earlier, I'd been so desperate for storage space that I'd paid a Vietnam veteran $10 to rent his rat-infested basement, never imagining the horror and hope buried beneath 60 years of silence. Before we dive into this story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. My name is Marcus, and until recently, I was just another struggling single father in Pittsburgh, watching helplessly as medical bills devoured every penny while my 8-year-old daughter Emma fought a rare form of leukemia. The insurance company had denied coverage for the experimental treatment that represented her last hope, $847,000. They called unproven, despite 3 other children achieving complete remission. I'd sold our car, emptied my 401k, even pawned my late wife Sarah's engagement ring, but I'd only raised $23,000. Time was running out faster than my ability to earn money as a warehouse supervisor. The day I met Walter Kraszewski changed everything, though I didn't know it at the time. I'd been searching Craigslist for cheap storage space to hold what remained of our furniture after downsizing from our modest house to a cramped apartment closer to the children's hospital. Most listings wanted $200, $300 monthly for decent spaces, money I couldn't spare when every dollar might buy Emma another day. Then I spotted Walter's ad. Basement storage, $10 month. Some rats, but they keep to themselves. Cash only, veterans preferred. The price seemed like a typo, but desperation makes you pursue even the most unlikely opportunities. I called immediately, and a gravelly voice answered on the first ring. "You a vet?" Walter asked without preamble. "No, sir, but my father served in Korea." A long pause. "Close enough. You need the whole basement or just part?" "Whatever $10 gets me." He chuckled, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "That gets you whatever you need, son. When can you come look?" Walter's house squatted on the edge of Polish Hill, a neighborhood that had seen better days when the steel mills still belched smoke across Pittsburgh's skyline. The 2-story brick structure looked solid despite peeling paint and a yard surrendering to dandelions. Walter himself matched his house, weathered but sturdy, somewhere in his 70s with the straight-back posture of career military despite favoring his left leg. "Wounded at Khe Sanh," he explained, noticing my glance. "Shrapnel decided to take up permanent residence." "Come on, let's see this basement." The narrow stairs descended into darkness that smelled of damp concrete and decades of neglect. Walter pulled a chain, and a single bulb illuminated a space roughly 800 square feet with a dirt floor in some sections, crumbling concrete in others. True to the ad, I heard distinct scratching sounds from the darker corners. "They're more scared of you than you are of them," Walter assured me. "Been living here longer than I have. Previous owner was my Uncle Stanley. Left me the house when he passed in '92. Your uncle lived here long? Bought it in 1946, right after the war. He was." Walter paused, choosing words carefully. "Complicated. Served as a translator with the Army Intelligence Corps in Europe. Never talked about it much. Died with more secrets than a CIA filing cabinet." I surveyed the basement, mentally calculating how much furniture would fit. Despite the rats and general decay, it was dry and secure. For $10 monthly, I couldn't complain. "I'll take it," I decided. "When can I start moving things in?" "Whenever you want. Here's a key." Walter handed me a brass key that looked original to the house. "Fair warning, though I'm not much for visitors. You come and go as you need, but I keep to myself mostly." "Understood. The $10. First of each month is fine. Cash in the mailbox if I'm not around." He studied me with eyes that had seen too much. "You got kids? Notice the car seat in your vehicle. A daughter, Emma. She's 8. Something shifted in his expression. Same age as my granddaughter would be. My son came back from Iraq different. Marriage didn't survive it. Haven't seen little Susie in 3 years now. The pain in his voice matched my own different circumstances, but the same ache of separation from a child. We stood in that musty basement, 2 men carrying weights that threatened to crush us. "Well," Walter said gruffly, "basement's yours. Try not to disturb the rats too much. They've got squatters' rights by now. Over the following weeks, I developed a routine. After 12-hour shifts at the warehouse, I'd visit Emma at the hospital until visiting hours ended, then drive to Walter's basement to work on furniture restoration, a side business. I'd started to raise money for treatment. The space was far from ideal, but it was private and cheap, letting me save every possible penny. Walter kept his promise about privacy. Sometimes I'd see him silhouetted in an upstairs window, but he never came down while I worked. Occasionally, I'd find a thermos of coffee on the basement steps with a note, "Thought you might need this, W." These small kindnesses meant more than he probably knew. The rats proved less troublesome than expected. They stayed in their corners, and I stayed in mine. Live and let live. I'd known worse roommates in college. Emma's condition worsened as autumn arrived. Dr. Patel tried to remain optimistic, but I could read the truth in her careful phrases. "We're doing everything we can" meant we're running out of options. The experimental treatment in Philadelphia loomed like a mirage in the desert, visible but unreachable, promising water to a dying man who couldn't afford the journey. One October evening, frustration boiled over as I worked on an antique dresser in the basement. The veneer wouldn't adhere properly, my hands shook from exhaustion, and I'd just received another insurance denial letter. In a moment of rage, I slammed my hammer down hard, missing the dresser entirely and striking the concrete floor with tremendous force. The impact sent a spiderweb of cracks across a 3-foot section. As I knelt to assess the damage, wondering if I'd have to pay Walter for repairs I couldn't afford, I noticed something odd. The concrete here was different, newer than the surrounding floor, poured in a rough rectangle about 6 feet by 8 feet. Curiosity replaced anger. Why would someone pour a concrete patch in a basement with mostly dirt floors? I grabbed a crowbar and began chipping at the cracked section. The concrete was only about 4 inches thick, poorly mixed, and crumbled easily once I got leverage under it. Beneath lay a wooden trap door, its planks dark with age, but solid. My heart hammered as I cleared away debris. The door had heavy iron hinges and a padlock that had long since rusted through. Using the crowbar, I snapped the lock and lifted the door. A wooden ladder descended into blackness. The smell that wafted up was different from the basement's usual mustiness, drier, older, carrying hints of machine oil and something else I couldn't identify. I grabbed my work flashlight and aimed it down. The beam illuminated what appeared to be a small sub-basement, perhaps 8 feet deep. The walls were lined with brick, and the floor was packed earth. But what made my breath catch were the wooden crates stacked along one wall, military-style containers with faded markings stenciled on their sides. I descended carefully, the ladder creaking but holding my weight. The space was cramped, maybe 10 feet square, but meticulously organized. Beyond the crates, metal shelving held dozens of smaller boxes and leather-wrapped bundles. Everything was covered in decades of dust, but otherwise well-preserved in the dry environment. I approached the nearest crate, brushing away dirt to read the stenciled markings. Most were in German, but I recognized numbers: 1,944. My hands trembled as I used the crowbar to pry open the lid, nails screaming against wood that hadn't moved in decades. Inside, nested in rotted fabric that might once have been velvet, lay rows of gold bars. Each one was roughly the size of a smartphone, but heavier than seemed possible, stamped with the Nazi eagle and swastika, along with numbers and German text. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. Things like this happened in movies, not in rundown basements in Pittsburgh. I opened another crate. More gold. A third held what looked like vintage currency, neat bundles of bills in various European denominations. A smaller box revealed jewelry rings, necklaces, watches tangled together like golden serpents. My stomach turned as I realized where such a collection likely originated. These weren't just valuables. They were plunder, stolen from families who probably didn't survive to reclaim them. I sat heavily on the earthen floor, flashlight trembling in my grip. Walter's uncle Stanley, the Army intelligence translator who never discussed his service, had hidden a fortune in stolen Nazi gold beneath his basement, and now I'd found it, decades after his death, while his nephew lived in poverty above, unaware of the wealth beneath his feet. The moral implications crashed over me in waves. This gold was blood money, stolen from Holocaust victims, but it could save Emma's life. The experimental treatment that insurance wouldn't cover, the specialist who demanded payment up front, the medications that cost more than I made in a month, all of it was suddenly within reach. I climbed from the hidden chamber on unsteady legs, mind racing. Should I tell Walter? The gold was in his house, making it legally his. But he'd mentioned being on a fixed income, struggling with property taxes. If he knew about this fortune, surely he would have used it by now. His uncle had hidden it for a reason, taking the secret to his grave. What happens next will turn this discovery upside down, reveal truths nobody expected, and force me to choose between my daughter's life and my soul. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. I spent a sleepless night wrestling with the decision. By morning, I had reached a conclusion that would haunt me either way. I had to tell Walter. Whatever his uncle's reasons for hiding the gold, it wasn't my secret to keep. Emma's life mattered more than anything to me, but I couldn't build her future on a foundation of theft, even from a man who'd stolen it first. The next evening, I knocked on Walter's front door instead of heading straight to the basement. He answered with obvious surprise. In 2 months of renting, I'd never come to the main house. "Everything okay with the space?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. His living room was sparse but clean, dominated by a recliner facing an old television and walls lined with military photos and commendations. A folded flag in a triangular case held the place of honor on the mantel. "Walter, I need to show you something in the basement, something important." His eyes narrowed with the instinctive wariness of a combat veteran. "What kind of something?" "It's better if I show you, but you should know. I found something that belonged to your uncle, something he hid." Walter was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Then he reached for a cane I hadn't seen him use before. "Lead the way." I guided him to the broken concrete and the revealed trapdoor. His face went pale as he stared at the opening. "My God," he whispered. "All these years. You knew about this?" Not exactly." He lowered himself carefully to sit on a crate, suddenly looking every one of his 70-some years. Uncle Stanley used to talk when he drank, which was often near the end, rambling about sins that couldn't be absolved, about blood that wouldn't wash off. I thought it was metaphor, PTSD from the war. He mentioned something hidden, something that would curse anyone who found it. I assumed he meant memories. I helped him down the ladder, supporting his weight as we descended. When my flashlight illuminated the crates and their contents, Walter's legs nearly buckled. "Jesus Christ, Stanley," he breathed. "What did you do?" We sat in that cramped chamber as Walter pieced together fragments of his uncle's story. Stanley Kraszewski had been attached to a unit tasked with tracking down Nazi assets in the chaos of Germany's collapse. Opportunities for personal enrichment were everywhere: abandoned strongholds, fleeing officers, Swiss bank accounts with no living claimants. "He wasn't a bad man," Walter insisted. "At least, I don't think he started that way. But war changes the equation. He probably told himself he was taking from monsters who'd stolen it first. Maybe he planned to return it someday, find the rightful owners. But he never did. No. Came home, bought this house with cash, and drank himself to death over 46 years. Walter touched one of the gold bars with something like revulsion. Blood money. "That's what this is. It could help people now," I said carefully. "Your property taxes, medical bills. Your daughter," Walter said, proving he was more observant than his reclusive nature suggested. "You mentioned her that first day. The furniture restoration, working all hours, you're trying to save her, aren't you?" I told him everything: Emma's diagnosis, the experimental treatment, our insurance company's refusal, the impossible sum needed. Walter listened without interrupting, his weathered face cycling through emotions I couldn't fully read. "How much?" he asked when I finished. $847,000, plus travel costs, temporary housing in Philadelphia, missed work. Walter laughed bitterly. "There's probably 10 times that in this hole, enough to save a dozen little girls." He picked up one of the gold bars, testing its weight. "But at what cost? This gold has blood on it. Jewish blood, Polish blood, Roma blood. Can something stolen from the dead really save the living?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I just know my daughter is running out of time." We climbed back to the main basement in heavy silence. Walter paced despite his limp, cane tapping erratically on the concrete. "I need to think," he said finally. "Give me tonight. Come back tomorrow evening, and we'll figure this out together." I wanted to argue, to beg for an immediate decision with Emma's time slipping away, but Walter had earned the right to process this revelation. His family's hidden shame had suddenly become real, demanding choices that would define who we were beneath our desperation. The next 24 hours stretched like torture. I worked my warehouse shift in a haze, visited Emma, and tried to hide my distraction, then returned to Walter's as evening fell. He met me at the door, looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. "I've made a decision," he announced, leading me not to the basement but to his kitchen. The table was covered with papers, old letters, photographs, military documents. Spent all night and today going through Stanley's things. Found some answers. He showed me a letter dated 1947, written in shaky English. "Mr. Krashevsky, thank you for trying. We understand the difficulties. Perhaps someday the world will be ready to hear these truths. Until then, we trust your conscience. A. Rosen." I tracked down the name. Walter explained. Abraham Rosen was a Holocaust survivor who worked with the Allies to recover stolen Jewish assets. This letter suggests Stanley did try to return at least some of what he took, but not all of it. No, according to his papers, he sent several shipments to Jewish relief organizations in the late 1942. Then the Cold War started, borders closed, and tracing survivors became nearly impossible. I think he kept the rest, telling himself he'd find a way to make it right someday. Walter pushed a photograph across the table, a young man in army uniform standing beside a pile of recovered artwork and valuables. Stanley Krashevsky, looking barely older than I was now, tasked with an impossible job in an impossible time. "Here's what we're going to do," Walter said. "We're going to sell enough gold to save your daughter. That's non-negotiable. Emma gets her treatment." My throat closed with emotion. "Walter, I'm not finished. The rest, we do this right. We find an organization that helps Holocaust survivors and their descendants. We document everything where it was found. Stanley's role, all of it. We don't hide from the shame. We acknowledge it and try to make whatever amends are possible. That could be complicated legally. You could lose the house, face charges. I'm 73 years old with a bad leg and worse lungs. What are they going to do? Give me community service?" He managed a weak smile. "Besides, maybe it's time this family faced its ghosts instead of living above them." Over the next week, we worked together to catalog the hidden chamber's contents. The full scope was staggering gold bars, currency from a dozen nations, jewelry, rare coins, even what appeared to be artwork rolled in protective tubes. Walter estimated the total value conservatively at $175 million in today's market. "Enough to save Emma and still return a fortune to its rightful owners," he said. The process of converting even a small portion to usable funds proved more complex than either of us anticipated. You can't simply walk into a bank with Nazi gold bars. Walter reached out to a lawyer he'd known in the service, David Hartman, who specialized in complex estate matters and had experience with recovered wartime assets. David's expression when we showed him the chamber was one I'll never forget, equal parts fascination and horror. "This is significant," he managed. "The historical importance alone, beyond the monetary value, we need to proceed very carefully." He explained our options. The gold could be sold through specific channels that dealt with historical artifacts, though this would trigger investigations and reporting requirements. The IRS would want their share. Various Jewish organizations would likely stake claims. The process could take months or years to resolve fully. But, David added, seeing my stricken expression, there are ways to expedite a portion for humanitarian purposes. Medical emergencies, especially for children, often receive special consideration. We can petition for an emergency release of funds while the larger issues are sorted out. The next month blurred together in a series of legal meetings, documentation, and careful negotiations. David proved invaluable, navigating bureaucracies with skill born from decades of practice. He arranged for a portion of gold to be authenticated and quietly sold to a private collector who specialized in historical artifacts and understood the delicate nature of our situation. The first check arrived on a Tuesday, $1.2 million after taxes and fees. I stared at it for an hour, this piece of paper that represented Emma's future built on such a dark foundation. Walter sat across from me in his kitchen, both of us silent with the weight of what we'd set in motion. "It's what Stanley should have done," Walter said finally. "Used it to help people instead of letting it rot in shame." 2 days later, Emma was accepted into the experimental treatment program at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The doctors were cautiously optimistic her cancer hadn't progressed as far as they'd feared, and she was. Young and strong. The treatment would be arduous, involving months of specialized therapy, but the success rates were encouraging. As we prepared for the move to Philadelphia, Walter surprised me with another decision. He was selling the house and donating the proceeds to children's cancer research. "Can't live above that chamber anymore," he explained. "Too many ghosts. Besides, this place is too big for one old man." The story of the gold eventually leaked, as such stories do. Reporters called constantly, wanting to sensationalize the tale of hidden Nazi treasure. We refused most interviews, but Walter agreed to one with a respected journalist who promised to focus on the restitution efforts rather than the sensational aspects. The resulting article, "The Basement of Conscience," a family's reckoning with historical debt, won several awards and helped facilitate the return of millions in assets to Holocaust survivor organizations. Walter became something of a reluctant hero in certain circles, the man who chose truth over fortune. Emma's treatment progressed better than anyone had dared hope. The experimental therapy, combined with her natural resilience and the excellent care she received, pushed the cancer into remission within 6 months. Each clean scan felt like a miracle built on a foundation of historical tragedy, life emerging from death, hope from horror. Walter moved to a small apartment near the hospital in Philadelphia, wanting to be close during Emma's treatment. He became a grandfather figure to her, reading stories during the long infusion sessions and teaching her card games he'd learned in the Army. When she asked why he helped us, he simply said, "Because it was the right thing to do, sweetheart. Sometimes that's all the reason you need." The legal complexities of the gold continued for years. Most of it was eventually distributed to various Holocaust remembrance organizations and survivor funds. Some pieces were identified as belonging to specific families and returned to descendants. A small museum in Washington acquired several items for their permanent collection on Nazi plunder and restitution efforts. Walter testified before a congressional committee about his uncle's story and the importance of confronting historical wrongs. His words were simple but powerful. "My Uncle Stanley lived with his secret for 46 years, and it poisoned him. Secrets like this don't stay buried. They seep up through the foundations and contaminate everything built on top. The only remedy is truth, however painful." As I write this, 5 years have passed since that October night when my hammer broke through concrete and revealed a fortune. Emma is 13 now, healthy and thriving, planning to become a pediatric oncologist to help other children as she was helped. The experimental treatment that saved her has since become standard protocol, helping hundreds of other children. Walter passed away last spring at age 78. His funeral was attended by an unexpected mix of mourners, veterans from his unit, Jewish community leaders, families who'd benefited from the restitution funds, and dozens of children who'd been helped by the cancer research donations he'd funded. Emma delivered a eulogy that left not a dry eye in the chapel. "Mr. Walter taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always possible. He could have kept the gold secret. He could have been rich. Instead, he chose to be good. He saved my life, but more than that, he showed me how to live it." The house on Polish Hill was demolished last year. The basement filled in and built over with a small park. A plaque marks the spot. On this site, a family chose conscience over comfort, truth over treasure. May their example inspire others to confront the past with courage and build the future with honor. I still work at the warehouse, though I've been promoted to shift manager. The furniture restoration business continues on. Weekends no longer a desperate scramble for money, but a craft I enjoy. Sometimes I catch myself running my hands over wood grain and remembering those late nights in Walter's basement when I was just trying to save my daughter and instead uncovered a legacy that changed dozens of lives. The rats, Walter would be amused to know, were relocated humanely before demolition. Even they deserve better than to be buried with the secrets. David Hartman, the lawyer who'd guided us through the restitution process, became a close friend. He once told me that in 40 years of practice, he'd never seen anything quite like our case. Most people who find buried treasure try to keep it. He said, "You and Walter chose the harder path. That's rare. But it wasn't really that complicated. When I looked at my daughter dying in a hospital bed, and then looked at gold stolen from other people's dying children, the choice became clear. You can't build life on death, hope on someone else's despair. The gold could have made us wealthy, but it would have made us something else, too complicit in a historical crime, beneficiaries of genocide. Instead, we chose complexity over simplicity, righteousness over riches. Emma lived because Walter recognized that his uncle's shame could become someone else's salvation. The gold that had been buried in darkness for 60 years finally found the light, transformed from a curse into a blessing through the simple alchemy of human choice. Sometimes I dream about that basement, not nightmares, but strange, shifting visions where past and present merge. I see Stanley Khrushchevsky as a young soldier, prying open crates in bombed-out buildings, convincing himself he's taking from the takers. I see families fleeing with nothing while their treasures are cataloged and boxed. I see Walter, decades later, staring at his uncle's legacy with the wisdom to know that some gifts are too heavy to accept. And I see Emma, running in the park built over that basement, her laughter bright and clear as church bells, life victorious over death, joy rising from sorrow, the future freed from the past's buried chains. The full story made national news eventually, sparking debates about restitution, historical justice, and the obligations we inherit from previous generations. Some criticized Walter for not keeping the fortune that was legally his. Others praised his moral courage. But for those of us who lived through it, the story was simpler: an old soldier and a desperate father, choosing to transform a curse into a cure. Emma knows the full story now, age-appropriate versions having given way to complex truth as she's grown. She struggles sometimes with the knowledge that her life was saved by such tainted means. But I remind her of what Walter always said: "The gold didn't save you, sweetheart. The choice to use it for good saved you." There's a difference. She plans to spend a year in Israel after high school, volunteering at a hospital that treats both Jewish and Palestinian children. Continuing Walter's work, she calls it understanding intuitively that healing transcends all boundaries, that medicine can be a form of restitution for historical wounds. The last time I visited the park on Polish Hill, I brought flowers, not for a grave, but for a beginning. Where the basement once held secrets, children now play. Where gold once lay buried, gardens grow. It seems fitting that life has reclaimed that space, that laughter has replaced the silence of shame. Walter's final letter to me, written a week before his death and delivered by David after the funeral, remains my most treasured possession. In shaky handwriting that revealed his failing health, he wrote, "Marcus, thank you for that October night. Not for finding the gold, but for finding me. I'd been hiding in that house as surely as Stanley hid his treasure, buried under the weight of family shame I didn't even fully understand. You and Emma gave me the chance to transform our curse into purpose." Tell her she didn't just receive life from that dark foundation, she redeemed it. Every breath she takes cleanses another piece of that gold. With love and gratitude, Walter. The Experimental Treatment Center in Philadelphia has expanded significantly, funded in part by ongoing revenues from the Restitution Fund. They've named one wing the Khrushchevsky Center, not for Stanley, but for Walter, the man who chose conscience over comfort. Emma volunteers there during school breaks, reading to younger patients and sharing her story of survival and moral complexity. Dr. Patel, who treated Emma through her darkest days, told me recently that her case changed how he approaches desperate families. "I used to focus solely on the medical aspects," he admitted. "Your story taught me that healing involves more than biology. It requires confronting the moral dimensions of how we save lives, acknowledging that even good outcomes can have complicated origins." The Jewish Community Center in Pittsburgh now hosts an annual lecture series on restitution and reconciliation, funded by part of the gold's proceeds. Survivors and their descendants share stories not just of loss, but of recovery, not just of theft, but of return. Walter's photograph hangs in their hallway, a Polish Catholic who became an unlikely hero in their narrative of justice. Sometimes reporters still call, wanting to revisit the story, especially when similar caches of hidden wartime loot are discovered. I usually decline, feeling that we've said what needed saying, but occasionally, when the request comes from someone genuinely interested in the ethical dimensions rather than the sensational aspects, I agree to speak. What would you do? They invariably ask. If you could go back, knowing what you know now, would you break through that concrete again? The answer is always yes, but with an addendum. I would break through not just to save Emma, but because secrets that profound demand exposure. The basement held more than gold. It held a family's unconfessed guilt, a nation's unprocessed trauma, and ultimately, an opportunity for transformation that exceeded any monetary value. The rats that once scurried through that basement have become something of a metaphor in our family's retelling. They lived above treasure they couldn't access or understand, surviving on scraps while fortune lay beneath their feet. Aren't we all sometimes like those rats, scrambling in the dark, unaware of what lies just below the surface of our daily struggles? But unlike rats, we have choice. When the concrete breaks and reveals what's hidden, we can decide what to do with our discoveries. We can hoard or share, conceal or reveal, perpetuate harm, or pursue healing. Walter and I, unlikely partners brought together by desperation and chance, chose the harder path. Not because we were especially virtuous, but because when you're holding stolen light, the only moral choice is to let it shine. Emma asked me once if I regretted that we didn't keep more of the gold, if I ever lay awake thinking about the wealth we'd surrendered. I told her the truth, that I sleep better knowing we transformed blood money into life-giving treatment, that poverty with integrity feels richer than wealth built on someone else's graves. But weren't we entitled to some compensation? She pressed, with a teenager's developing sense of justice. You suffered too. We nearly lost everything trying to save me. We gained everything, I corrected her. We gained Walter's friendship, your life, and the knowledge that when tested, we chose righteousness over riches. That's compensation beyond any bank account. The park on Polish Hill blooms magnificently each spring, tended by a community group that includes several Holocaust survivors and their descendants. They plant flowers that have meaning: forget-me-nots for remembrance, sunflowers for hope, roses for love, persisting through thorns. Children play on equipment partially funded by the gold's proceeds, their joy a living testament to choices made in basement darkness years before. I think Stanley Krashevsky would appreciate this ending to his story. The gold he couldn't bring himself to fully return has finally found its way home. Not to original owners long dead, but to their spiritual inheritors, children who need healing, communities seeking justice, futures built on acknowledged rather than hidden foundations. And Walter, dear Walter, who chose truth over treasure, lives on in every ethical choice born from his example. He showed us that inheritance isn't just about assets, it's about moral debts that compound across generations until someone has the courage to pay them with interest. As I finish writing this account, Emma is preparing for her first year of medical school, having graduated summa cum laude with a degree in biochemistry and a minor in ethics. She plans to specialize in pediatric oncology with a focus on ensuring treatment accessibility regardless of economic status. The girl saved by hidden gold wants to save others through transparent compassion. The basement on Polish Hill is gone, filled with earth and covered with grass. But its lessons remain, that the past doesn't stay buried, that secrets corrode from within, that blood money can be cleansed through conscious choice, and that sometimes the greatest treasures we find are the opportunities to make things right. Every family has its basements, dark places where previous generations hid their shame, their failures, their compromises with evil. We can choose to live above them unknowingly, or we can take up the crowbar and break through, ready to face whatever lies beneath. The work is hard, the discovery is often painful, but the alternative, letting the poison seep upward through the foundations, is worse. Walter Kraszewski died as he lived his final years, with clarity, purpose and the peace that comes from choosing conscience over comfort. His funeral drew hundreds who'd been touched by his decision to expose rather than exploit his family's hidden wealth. Emma and I sat in the front row, not as beneficiaries, but as family, the truest inheritance he could have given us. The last entry in Walter's journal, found after his death, serves as fitting epilogue to this strange chapter of interconnected lives. The gold is gone, distributed to those who deserve it. The basement is filled, its secrets exposed to healing light. I am tired but content. We cannot change what previous generations buried, but we can choose what we build on top. May those who come after us find solid ground. In the end, that October night when my hammer broke through, concrete changed everything and nothing. Emma still faced cancer. I still worked long hours. Bills still demanded payment, but beneath the unchanged surface, everything shifted. We discovered that desperation could lead to discovery, that strangers could become family, that cursed gold could fund blessed healing. The storage space I'd rented for $10 became the doorway to moral complexity I never imagined navigating. But with Walter as guide and Emma as motivation, we found our way through historical darkness toward something like light. Not perfect resolution, the original victims remained robbed, the initial crimes unpunished, but movement toward justice, steps in the right direction. Every time I pass a construction site where workers break through concrete, I think of that night. Every time I see children playing where something old has been demolished, I remember the park on Polish Hill. Every time Emma laughs, and she laughs often, gloriously alive and grateful for it, I thank Walter for showing us that the heaviest burdens can become the greatest gifts if we're willing to do the lifting. Some stories end with clear resolution, but ours continues to unfold. The ripples from that basement discovery spread outward still in. Medical treatments funded, in survivors helped, in moral choices influenced by our example. We didn't seek to become part of history's long reckoning with the Holocaust theft, but the basement chose us as surely as we chose conscience. To those who say we were fools to give away a fortune, I offer Emma's life as counter-argument. To those who say we should have kept it all secret, I point to the dozens helped by our transparency. To those who wonder what they would do in our place, I say only this. You don't know until the hammer falls and the concrete cracks, and you're staring at choices you never imagined making. But I hope, when your moment comes and your basement breaks open, that you'll remember Walter Kraszewski, the wounded veteran who could have been rich but chose to be righteous instead. Remember that every family's hidden shame can become another family's salvation if we have the courage to drag it into the light. Remember that the truest inheritance we leave isn't money, but the moral examples that guide others through their own dark discoveries. The basement is filled now, the gold dispersed, the story told. But in Philadelphia, a teenage girl dreams of healing others as she was healed. In Pittsburgh, a park blooms where secrets once festered. And somewhere, perhaps, Stanley Kraszewski's tormented spirit finally rests, his burden lifted by a nephew who refused to let shame compound across generations. This is what we found in the $10 basement, not just gold but choice, not just treasure but truth, not just wealth but the chance to transform a family's darkest secret into light for those who need it most. The rats are gone, the concrete sealed, but the lessons remain, waiting for the next person who swings a hammer in frustration and discovers that sometimes the greatest treasures are the chances to make things right. The story of the $10 basement didn't end with Walter's death or Emma's recovery. In many ways, those were simply chapters in a larger narrative about how the past refuses to stay buried and how the choices we make ripple through generations in ways we can't always foresee. 3 years after the park was dedicated on Polish Hill, I received an unexpected call from David Hartman. "Marcus, we have a situation. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" David's usually composed demeanor showed cracks of concern when I arrived. Spread across his conference table were documents in German, photographs, and what appeared to be architectural blueprints. "Remember the art tubes we found in the basement?" he began. "The ones we assumed contained paintings?" I nodded. We turned everything over to the restitution committee without fully cataloging the non-gold items, trusting the experts to handle the details. One tube contained something unexpected, Not art, but architectural plans and documents related to a larger network. David's finger traced across a blueprint showing what appeared to be a system of connected basements throughout Polish Hill. Stanley Kraszewski wasn't working alone. My stomach dropped. What are you saying? According to these documents, at least 5 other houses in the neighborhood have similar hidden chambers. Stanley was part of a group, All Intelligence Corps translators, who appropriated materials during the occupation. The implications were staggering. Our discovery hadn't been an isolated incident, but part of a systematic operation. These men had returned to Pittsburgh, bought houses in the same neighborhood, and lived above their buried secrets for decades. The other houses? I asked. 2 have been demolished over the years. 1 is now a parking lot, but 3 still stand, still occupied. David showed me a list of addresses. We have a legal and moral obligation to investigate, but this is going to be complicated. The current owners bought these properties innocently. They have no connection to the original crimes. Over the following months, a delicate operation unfolded. David worked with federal authorities and historical preservation experts to investigate the remaining houses without causing undue alarm. The legal complexities were mind-boggling. Property rights, historical claims, the statute of limitations on various crimes, and the ethical dimensions of disturbing families who'd done nothing wrong. The first house yielded nothing. Either the basement had been filled during renovations, or the documents were wrong. The second, owned by an elderly Polish immigrant named Casimir Jankowski, told a different story. Casimir had always wondered about the locked room in his basement. The previous owner had insisted it remain sealed, claiming dangerous structural issues. For 40 years, Casimir had respected that prohibition. When investigators carefully opened it, they found another cache smaller than Walter's, but still significant. Gold coins, jewelry, and, disturbingly, hundreds of wedding rings sorted by size. Casimir's reaction broke my heart. The man collapsed into a kitchen chair, rosary beads sliding through trembling fingers. "I lived above this?" he whispered in accented English. "All these years, making my morning coffee while?" He couldn't finish. Unlike Walter, Casimir had no connection to the original crime. He'd bought the house honestly in 1978, worked as a janitor at Carnegie Mellon, raised 4 children in those rooms. Now, his American dream was built literally on stolen Jewish wedding rings. David and I spent hours with Casimir, explaining the restitution process, assuring him he wasn't under suspicion. But the old man's distress went deeper than legal concerns. "My own family fled Poland during the war," he said. "We lost everything, and now I find out I've been living above someone else's lost everything?" The third house presented the most complex situation. It belonged to the Adler family, Joshua and Ruth Adler, both professors at the University of Pittsburgh. The historical irony was sharp, a Jewish family unknowingly living above Holocaust plunder. When David delicately explained the situation, Ruth Adler's response surprised everyone. "We always knew something was wrong with this house," she said. "Not structurally, but spiritually. I'm not usually one for mysticism, but there's always been a heaviness here." The Adlers insisted on being present when their basement was opened. What we found there differed from the other caches. Along with the expected gold and valuables was a meticulously kept journal, apparently maintained by the original owner, Thomas Kelly. Unlike Stanley's guilt-ridden ramblings, Kelly had documented everything: names, dates, locations where items were taken, even physical descriptions of original owners were known. "My God," Joshua Adler breathed, reading over my shoulder. "This reads like an accountant's ledger of theft." Ruth picked up a silver menorah from among the artifacts, her hand shaking. "This could have belonged to my grandmother's sister. She lived in Prague, disappeared in 1942. She set it down carefully. Or to any of thousands like her." The Adlers faced a unique position. As victims' descendants finding stolen property in their own home, they had both moral authority and terrible burden. They chose to turn their house into a living museum, keeping the basement chamber as it was found, offering tours to school groups and researchers, using the space to educate about the Holocaust and its ongoing reverberations. "We can't undo the theft," Ruth explained at the museum's opening, "but we can ensure it's never forgotten or repeated." Emma attended that opening. now 15 and deeply engaged with the expanding story of what she'd come to call our basement family. She'd started a blog documenting not just her own survival story, but the wider network of lives affected the discoveries. One of her posts particularly moved me. People ask if I feel guilty that stolen gold saved my life. The answer is complicated. Yes, I carry the weight of that knowledge. But I also carry the responsibility to live a life worthy of the sacrifice, not just the sacrifice of those who lost their treasures, but of Walter, who gave up wealth for righteousness, of my dad, who chose honesty over easy money, of all the families now confronting inherited shame. My life is a debt I repay through service. The blog attracted attention from around the world. Other families came forward with similar stories: basements unopened for generations, safety deposit boxes with unclear origins, artwork that might be beautiful or might be bloodstained. Emma became an unofficial counselor to these families, helping them navigate the emotional and practical complexities of confronting inherited guilt. One message particularly stood out. Maria Kowalski, a teacher in Chicago, wrote, "My grandfather always insisted we never sell his house in Pittsburgh, even after he died. He said it held the family fortune, but we found only an empty basement. Now, I wonder, was there something there once? Did someone else already find it and stay quiet?" This raised uncomfortable questions about how many other discoveries might have been made and hidden. How many people chose wealth over Walter's path of conscience? David estimated that if all of Stanley's group had stolen similar amounts, over $1 billion in today's values could be scattered in basements across Pittsburgh. The city grappled with this legacy in various ways. The Historical Society created an exhibition called Hidden Truths: Pittsburgh's Secret Holocaust Connection. Some embraced it as an opportunity for education and reconciliation. Others resented the negative attention, arguing that a few bad actors shouldn't taint the entire community. Local Rabbi Stephen Feldman provided crucial perspective during a community forum. The question isn't whether your grandfather was a thief. The question is what you do when you discover he was. Do you continue the concealment, or do you choose truth? The sin isn't in the inheritance, but in the perpetuation. These words resonated with Michael Krzyzewski, Walter's distant cousin, who'd been following the story from Denver. Michael reached out with his own family secret. His branch had always wondered about grandfather Stanley's brother Victor, who'd also served in intelligence and returned with unexplained wealth. He bought a ranch in Colorado with cash in 1946. Michael explained over coffee during his visit to Pittsburgh. Raised cattle, lived quietly, drank heavily. Sound familiar? We added Colorado to the expanding map of hidden caches. Michael, inspired by Walter's example, initiated searches of his inherited property. They found a smaller cache, but one with meticulous documentation. Victor had apparently planned to return items, but died before acting on those intentions. The network grew. Families across the country began examining their histories more carefully, asking uncomfortable questions about post-war windfalls. A national database was established to match recovered items with survivor families. Emma, still in high school but mature beyond her years, served on the Youth Advisory Board. Dr. Patel, Emma's oncologist, observed during a checkup, "Your daughter has transformed medical trauma into moral purpose. That's remarkably rare. Most survivors just want to forget and move forward." "She won't let us forget," I replied. She says forgetting dishonors both the victims and Walter. Emma's health remained strong, the experimental treatment having achieved complete remission. But she carried other marks from her experience: a seriousness unusual in teenagers, a tendency to question the ethics of everyday decisions, an inability to take anything for granted. Her college application essay, which she shared with me, revealed the depth of her processing. "I am alive because of stolen gold. This fact shapes every breath I take. Some would say this makes my life tainted, built on blood money. I prefer to think it makes my life a responsibility. Every day I must ask, am I living in a way that honors the true owners of my survival? Am I transforming their stolen treasures into treasured service? The gold is gone, distributed to righteous causes. But the debt remains, payable only through a lifetime of conscious choices." She was accepted to every school she applied to, ultimately choosing a program that combined pre-med with Holocaust studies. I need to understand both parts of my story, she explained. The medical miracle and the moral complexity. Walter's apartment in Philadelphia had been maintained as a small memorial by the hospital where Emma was treated. Staff would bring particularly difficult cases there, not for medical treatment, but for perspective. The space where an old veteran chose conscience over comfort became a sanctuary for others facing impossible choices. I visited monthly, usually alone, sitting in Walter's chair and talking to him as if he were still there. I'd update him on the restitution progress, on Emma's achievements, on the ongoing discoveries. Sometimes other visitors would be there, families Walter had helped, veterans who'd known him, strangers who'd heard the story and came seeking their own clarity. One afternoon I found a young woman crying in Walter's kitchen. She introduced herself as Jennifer, granddaughter of one of Stanley's intelligence unit colleagues. She'd just discovered her own family's basement secret in Milwaukee. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "My parents want to keep it quiet. They say Grandpa earned that money, that it's our inheritance. But I keep thinking about your story, about Walter." I told her what Walter told me during our own crisis. "The choice is yours, but remember, you'll live with it every day. Every morning you'll wake up knowing what's beneath your feet. Decide which burden you'd rather carry, the weight of truth or the weight of concealment." Jennifer chose truth. Her parents resented her for it, but she joined our strange fraternity of families confronting inherited shame. At our annual gathering, yes, it became formal enough to require annual gatherings, she spoke about the liberation that came with exposure. "The secret was killing us slowly," she said. "Every family gathering, every achievement, every joy was shadowed by what we weren't discussing. Now we're poorer financially, but richer in every way that matters." These gatherings grew from a dozen people in a Pittsburgh community center to hundreds in a downtown hotel. Families shared strategies for restitution, psychologists offered coping mechanisms, historians provided context, and lawyers navigated ongoing legal complexities. Emma attended every gathering, becoming an unofficial ambassador for the younger generation. She organized youth workshops on inherited responsibility, creating safe spaces for children and teenagers to process their family's complicated legacies. "We didn't choose our inheritance," she would tell them, "but we can choose our response." The financial impact of the restitutions was significant but manageable. Most families, following Walter's example, retained enough to handle immediate needs while returning the bulk to appropriate organizations. The Holocaust Memorial Museum established a special fund to handle these conscience-driven returns, using the money for education and survivor support. But the emotional impact rippled wider. Marriage counselors reported increases in couples confronting family secrets. Therapists developed new frameworks for addressing inherited guilt. Universities created courses on intergenerational trauma and moral repair. Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, no relation to David, published a groundbreaking study on what she called the Krzyzewski effect, the psychological and social impacts of choosing disclosure over concealment when confronting family crimes. Her research showed that families who revealed secrets reported higher levels of life satisfaction and stronger relationships than those who maintained concealment. "The initial pain is intense," she wrote, "but like surgery to remove a tumor, the healing that follows is profound." The Krzyzewski model shows us that moral courage can transform generational curses into blessings. Not everyone agreed. Critics argued we were unfairly punishing descendants for ancestors' crimes, that statutes of limitations existed for good reasons, that dragging up old sins served no one. Online forums debated whether I should have kept the gold for Emma without telling anyone. "Your daughter almost died because you chose honesty over her life?" One particularly harsh critic wrote, "What kind of father does that?" Emma herself answered that critic in a public response that went viral. "The kind of father who ensured I could look at myself in mirrors for the rest of my life. The kind who taught me that integrity matters more than breath, that how we live matters more than whether we live. I'm alive because of many people's courage, Walter's, my father's, the doctors who developed my treatment, the families who chose restitution over riches. To honor some and not others would make my survival a lie." As the 10-year anniversary of the discovery approached, a documentary filmmaker named Rachel Chen contacted us about creating a comprehensive account. She'd won an Academy Award for her previous work on historical reckonings and approached our story with appropriate sensitivity. The filming process reopened many wounds. Sitting in the reconstructed basement chamber created for the film, since the original was filled, I found myself shaking with remembered desperation. The hammer in my hand, a prop, but weighted like the original, brought back that night of rage and discovery. Emma participated in the filming, now a medical student fulfilling her promise to transform survival into service. She walked through the children's cancer ward where she'd been treated, pointing out the expansion funded by restitution money. "This bed," she said, touching a standard hospital bed that looked like dozens of others, "is where I was dying. And that chair is where my dad sat for 16 hours straight during my worst night. He could have been counting gold bars. Instead, he was counting my breaths." The documentary, titled The Reckoning, premiered at major film festivals before reaching wider audiences. It sparked new waves of family revelations and basement searches. The Polish Hill neighborhood, once embarrassed by the attention, now embraced its role in this ongoing story of confrontation and conscience. The park where Walter's house once stood became a pilgrimage site of sorts. People left flowers, stones in the Jewish tradition, and notes sharing their own struggles with family secrets. The city installed a bench with a plaque reading, "In memory of those who chose truth over treasure." Emma and I often sat on that bench, watching children play where secrets once festered. The parallel to her recovery wasn't lost on either of us. Health emerging from sickness, joy from sorrow, life from the proximity of death. "Do you think Walter knew?" she asked once. "When he first rented you the basement, do you think he suspected something was down there?" I'd wondered the same thing countless times. Maybe not consciously, but maybe some part of him was ready for truth to finally surface. He could have sent me away when I found it. Instead, he chose to face it with me. The legal ramifications continued for years. International courts established new precedents for handling historical plunder. Insurance companies grappled with claims related to recovered items. Museums worldwide re-examined their collections for pieces with questionable provenance. David Hartman became the leading legal expert on restitution cases, traveling globally to advise families and institutions. He established a pro bono clinic at his firm specifically for conscience-driven restitutions, ensuring that fear of legal costs never prevented families from doing the right thing. Walter's courage was contagious, he explained at a conference. One man's choice to confront inherited shame created a template others could follow. We've handled over 500 cases now, recovering nearly $1 billion for appropriate distribution. The ripple effects reached unexpected places. A small museum in Poland, learning of our story, conducted its own investigation and discovered that several prized pieces had been looted. They voluntarily returned them, citing the Krzyzewski principle in their announcement. Corporate boards began discussing the concept in relation to historical injustices. Could companies apply similar principles to profits from slavery or colonialism? The conversations were complex and often heated, but the mere fact they were happening represented progress. Emma's blog evolved into a nonprofit organization called Inherited Light, providing resources for families grappling with historical crimes. They offered counseling, legal referrals, historical research, and most importantly, community for those choosing difficult truths over comfortable lies. At 25, Emma became the youngest person to address the United Nations on intergenerational justice. Her speech, delivered with the same quiet intensity that characterized Walter, challenged the assembly. Every nation, every family, every individual inherits both glory and shame from the past. The question isn't whether your ancestors were perfect, they weren't. The question is whether you'll perpetuate their sins or transform them into opportunities for healing. My life, saved by stolen gold and sanctified by chosen truth, stands as proof that transformation is possible. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. But for all the public recognition, the private moments mattered more. The letter from a survivor's grandson, thanking us for returning his grandmother's necklace. The message from a family who'd found their own basement, secret, and chose disclosure because of Walter's example. the young cancer patient who drew strength from Emma's story during her own treatment. These individual connections form the true legacy of the $10 basement. Not the gold itself, which was long dispersed, but the golden thread of courage connecting people across generations and geographies in the shared work of moral repair. As I write this final addition to our story, Emma is completing her residency in pediatric oncology at the same hospital where she was treated. She keeps Walter's photograph in her office and tells her young patients about the old soldier who saved her life by choosing conscience over comfort. He taught me that healing is about more than medicine, she tells them. It's about choosing truth even when lies would be easier, choosing others even when selfishness would be profitable, choosing light even when darkness offers cover. The basement on Polish Hill is gone, but basements everywhere continue to yield their secrets. Each discovery offers the same choice: Walter face profit from darkness or step into light. His example makes that choice clearer, if not easier. We gather annually now, the expanding family of those touched by this story, survivors and descendants, finders and returners, the healed and the healing. We share meals and memories, struggles and victories, bound by the strange alchemy that transforms historical poison into contemporary purpose. At our most recent gathering, Kazimierz Jankowski, now in his 90s, offered a toast that captured our collective journey, to basements that couldn't stay buried, to secrets that demanded telling, to Walter, who showed us the way, and to all of us who found the courage to follow. The glasses raised included mine and Emma's, but also hundreds of others, each representing a family that chose truth, a fortune, returned, a wound beginning to heal. The $10 basement had become priceless, not for what it contained, but for what it revealed, that even the darkest inheritance can be transformed into light if we're willing to do the work. The story continues to evolve, even now. Just last month, construction workers in Detroit uncovered another cache while renovating an old house. The homeowners, having heard our story through the documentary, immediately contacted David Hartman rather than keeping the discovery secret. Their choice added another link to the chain of conscience Walter began. Emma recently treated a young boy whose treatment was funded by the Restitution Foundation. His parents knew nothing of the gold's origin until she explained it during a quiet moment in the hospital corridor. The mother wept, understanding that her son's life was being saved by a chain of moral choices stretching back decades. "How do we ever repay this?" she asked. Emma smiled, channeling Walter's spirit. "By living well, by choosing right when the choice is hard, by remembering that we're all connected through our choices." The boy, named David after David Hartman, who'd made the legal framework possible, is now in remission. His family has become active in the foundation, helping other families navigate both the medical and moral complexities of accepting help with such weighted history. I still dream about that basement, but the dreams have evolved. No longer do I see only the moment of discovery or the anguish of choice. Now I see the basement as it truly was, a crucible where base metal was transformed into something precious through the alchemy of conscience. I see all the basements, all the choices, all the lives saved and souls salved, because one old veteran chose truth over treasure. Walter's grave in Philadelphia has become another pilgrimage site. People leave coins, not valuable ones, but pennies and nickels representing choices made. Each coin tells a story. Someone who returned found money, who confessed a lie, who chose honesty in a difficult moment. The accumulation of small change has become its own monument to the idea that ethical choices compound like interest. Emma plans to open a clinic specifically for children whose families can't afford treatment. She's already secured funding from various sources, including several families who found their own basement secrets and chose restitution. The clinic will be named after Walter, but she also plans to honor the unnamed victims whose stolen treasures ultimately saved lives. Every child we treat carries forward the redemption of that stolen gold. She explained in her funding proposal. Every life saved transforms historical tragedy into contemporary hope. The proposal was approved unanimously, with several board members moved to tears by the vision of transforming blood money into life-giving care. Construction begins next year on the site of another demolished house that once held secrets, another basement filled and built over with something better. Sometimes journalists ask if I regret that night in October when my hammer broke through concrete. The question seems absurd now. That moment of destruction became the foundation for everything meaningful in our lives since. Without it, Emma might have died. Walter would have remained isolated in his guilt. Hundreds of families would still be living above unexplored shame. Millions in restitution would remain buried. Most importantly, the moral lesson that choosing conscience over comfort transforms curses into blessings would remain unlearned. The $10 basement taught us that we all live above hidden histories. Some are literal basements with physical treasures or horrors. Others are family secrets, personal shame, collective guilt we've paved over with the concrete of denial. But concrete cracks, truth rises. And when it does, we face the same choice Walter faced: profit from darkness or transform it into light. I think often of Stanley Krasevsky, the young translator who started this chain of events. He made a terrible choice, stealing from the dead and dying, but even his wrong led eventually to right through Walter's courage. This doesn't excuse Stanley's crime, but it does suggest that redemption remains possible across generations if someone has the courage to break the concrete and face what lies beneath. Emma wears a simple gold ring now, not from the basement treasure, but one Walter left her in his will. Inside is engraved, "Truth over treasure, always." She fingers it during difficult moments in the hospital, when facing children whose prognoses are grim, when the weight of her history threatens to overwhelm her purpose. It reminds me, she told me, that every choice matters, that integrity isn't a luxury but a necessity, that we honor the dead by how we serve the living. The ring has become something of a talisman for others who've heard its story. Several jewelers now make similar rings for families in our network, each engraved with personal reminders of choices made and commitments to continue making them. It's become a symbol of membership and an unusual fellowship, those who've chosen revelation over concealment, restitution over riches. The Adler House Museum receives thousands of visitors annually now. Ruth Adler has become a powerful speaker on the subject of confronting inherited guilt. Her tours always end in the basement where the stolen treasures were found, but her message focuses on what happened after the choice to transform a crime scene into a classroom. This basement could have remained locked, she tells each group. Its secrets could have stayed buried. Instead, it became a place of learning and healing. Every one of you lives above some kind of basement. The question is, will you have the courage to open it? Many visitors leave in tears, resolved to confront their own family secrets. The museum's guest book has become a confession wall of sorts, with people writing about their own hidden treasures and horrors, their own struggles with inherited shame. Ruth reads each entry, sometimes reaching out to those who seem ready to take the next step toward disclosure and restitution. The network of basement discoveries has revealed patterns historians are still analyzing. The intelligence unit Stanley served in appears to have been particularly susceptible to temptation, with its members having unique access to Nazi plunder and the linguistic skills to obscure their theft. But they also seem to have been united by guilt. Almost all left evidence of attempts at restitution, journals expressing remorse, or deathbed confessions that went unheeded. This suggests something profound about human nature, that conscience persists even when we bury it, that truth demands expression even when we silence it. The basements full of stolen gold were also basements full of guilt, waiting for someone with the courage to break through both. As I finish this account, sitting in the park where Walter's house once stood, I'm surrounded by the sounds of life. Children play on equipment partially funded by restitution money. Elderly Holocaust survivors sit on benches in the shade, finding peace in this place where justice was finally served. Families spread blankets for picnics, unknowingly celebrating above what was once a crime scene transformed into sacred ground. This is the final lesson of the $10 basement, that any ground can become sacred if we're willing to do the work of transformation, that any curse can become a blessing if we choose conscience over comfort, that any darkness can yield to light if someone has the courage to break through the concrete and face what lies beneath. Walter showed us the way. Emma carries it forward. The chain of conscience extends in both directions, back through history as we confront inherited shame, forward through time as we model moral courage for those who come after. Each link strengthens the whole. Each choice to reveal rather than conceal makes the next choice easier for someone else. So this is our story, mine, Emma's, Walter's, and now yours. Because everyone who hears it becomes part of it, faced with their own basements, their own choices, their own opportunities to transform darkness into light. The gold is gone, distributed to its rightful purposes. But the real treasure, the knowledge that choosing truth over treasure enriches us all, remains available to anyone willing to claim it. May you find the courage to examine your own foundations. May you have the strength to break through whatever concrete you've poured over family secrets or personal shame. May you discover that the heaviest burdens become the lightest when shared honestly. And may you always remember Walter Kraszewski, the wounded veteran who paid $10 in rent and millions in moral courage, showing us all that the true treasure was never the gold, it was the choice to do right with what we find. The $10 basement is filled now, grown over with grass and children's laughter, but its lessons echo still, waiting in every basement, every hidden place, every human heart where truth struggles against concealment. Listen for the echo. Follow it down, break through the concrete, transform what you find into something worthy of the light. This is how we change the world. One basement at a time, one choice at a time, one conscience at a time, choosing truth over treasure. Walter showed us it could be done. Emma proves it was worth doing. Now the choice, as it always was and always will be, is yours. The rats are gone. The gold is dispersed. The concrete is broken. All that remains is to decide what you'll build on the foundation of truth. May you build something beautiful, something healing, something that transforms inherited shame into inherited wisdom. May you build something that would make Walter proud, because in the end, we all live in $10 basements, cheap spaces where we store what we can't bear to examine. But we all also have hammers, the tools of choice and conscience that can break through to what lies beneath. The only question is whether we'll use them. I used mine one October night in desperate anger, never imagining where it would lead. But desperation became discovery. Discovery became choice, and choice became transformation. The same possibility waits in every basement, for everyone willing to swing the hammer and face what breaks free. This is the complete story of the $10 basement, where $175 million in Nazi gold lay hidden for 60 years. But more than that, it's the story of how choosing conscience over comfort can transform the darkest inheritance into light. It's the story of Walter, who showed us how, of Emma, who shows us why, and of all the others who've chosen to break through their own concrete and transform what they find. The story ends where it began with a choice. But now you know what Walter knew, what Emma knows, what all of us who've lived this journey have learned. That the choice to reveal rather than conceal, to restore rather than hoard, to transform rather than perpetuate is always available. And that choosing truth over treasure, however painful in the moment, leads to riches beyond imagining, the wealth of integrity, the treasure of clean conscience, the gold of lives lived in service to justice. May we all find such wealth. May we all make such choices. May we all transform our basements from hiding places into holy ground. The work is hard, but the reward is freedom. Freedom from the weight of secrets. Freedom from the poison of shame. Freedom to build lives and communities on foundations of truth. The $10 basement gave us all of this and more. Not bad for a rat-infested storage space in a rundown house in Pittsburgh. Not bad for a desperate father with a hammer and a dying daughter. Not bad for an old veteran who chose conscience over comfort when it mattered most. Not bad at all. The 20-year anniversary of the basement discovery arrived with unexpected fanfare. What had begun as a desperate father's search for storage space had evolved into an international movement of conscience, with Basement Day now recognized in several countries as a time for confronting difficult inheritances. Emma, now 33 and running the Walter Kraszewski Memorial Clinic, organized a symposium bringing together hundreds of families who'd been touched by our story. The gathering took place in Pittsburgh, with the main sessions held in a conference center built on the site of another recovered basement, symbolic layers upon symbolic layers. The keynote speaker surprised everyone. Mikhail Petrov, a Russian oligarch who'd built his fortune on suspiciously acquired Soviet assets. He'd flown in specifically to announce he was opening his own basements, literal vaults containing artwork and gold that had disappeared during World War II. For 20 years, I told myself I was preserving history, Petrov said, his accent thick with emotion. But preservation without acknowledgement is just extended theft. The Khrushchevsky story taught me that true wealth comes from clean conscience. His announcement made international headlines. Within weeks, 3 other billionaires with questionable collections announced similar initiatives. The Khrushchevsky effect had reached the highest levels of global wealth, proving that conscience could indeed be contagious. During the symposium, I met Sarah Chen, whose story illustrated how far the ripples had spread. Her grandfather had been a Chinese diplomat who'd acquired a collection of Jewish artifacts while stationed in Vienna in 1938, claiming he was protecting them from the Nazis. The family had kept them in a private vault in San Francisco for 80 years. We always knew something was wrong with grandfather's story, Sarah explained. He saved these beautiful things, yes, but he never tried to return them. After seeing your documentary, my siblings and I couldn't pretend anymore. The Chen family's collection included prayer books, silver ceremonial items, and personal photographs that proved invaluable for identifying original owners. 3 families were reunited with their ancestors' possessions, including a Torah scroll that had been thought lost forever. But not all stories ended happily. Thomas Brennan from Boston shared how his basement discovery had torn his family apart. His father had built a construction empire on seed money that turned out to be stolen Nazi gold, hidden by his grandfather who'd been a guard at a displaced persons camp. My siblings wanted to keep it quiet, Thomas said. They argued the company employed hundreds of people, that revealing the truth would destroy innocent lives. But how innocent were we, really, prospering from genocide? Thomas chose disclosure, resulting in lawsuits, bankruptcy, and complete estrangement from his family. Yet he stood at the podium with clear eyes and steady voice, wearing a simple janitor's uniform from his current job at a hospital. I clean the cancer ward where kids like Emma fight for their lives, he said. It's honest work for honest pay. I sleep better now than I ever did in my mansion. Emma presented data from the clinic's first 5 years. They treated over 400 children whose families couldn't afford care, with an 82% remission rate. Each patient's file included a note about the gold that funded their treatment, ensuring the historical connection remained visible. We don't hide where the money came from, Emma explained. Every family knows their child's life was saved by stolen Jewish gold that was returned to serve justice. It's a heavy history, but acknowledging it transforms shame into purpose. One of her patients, 9-year-old Marcus Williams, named after me by parents who'd followed our story, spoke briefly. Miss Emma says I'm alive because Mr. Walter chose to do the right thing. So now I try to do the right thing too, even when it's hard. The child's simple words carried more weight than any scholarly analysis. This was the true legacy, not just lives saved, but values transmitted, creating generations who understood that moral choices matter. David Hartman, now in his 80s but still sharp, presented a legal framework that had been adopted by the United Nations for handling discovered historical assets. The Hartman Protocol established clear procedures, immediate disclosure to authorities, transparent investigation of provenance, priority given to restitution over prosecution for voluntary disclosures, and support services for families grappling with inherited guilt. We've learned that punishment doesn't encourage disclosure, David explained, but creating pathways for redemption does. Since the protocol's adoption, voluntary revelations have increased by 400%. The symposium's most moving session featured descendants of original victims meeting families who'd returned stolen items. Ruth Goldberg, whose grandparents' jewelry had been in Casimir Jankowski's basement, sat beside him on stage. When I first learned a stranger had been living above my family's wedding rings, I felt rage, Ruth admitted. But Casimir chose truth when he could have chosen silence. He honored my grandparents more through revelation than concealment. Casimir, now using a walker but mentally sharp, reached for Ruth's hand. Your family's treasures haunted my home until they were returned. Now, Ruth and I have coffee every week. From stolen goods, friendship grew. The audience wept openly at these connections, evil transformed into good through conscious choice. Historical Wounds Healing Through Present-Day Courage. A surprise guest appeared on the final day, Rebecca Thornton Gareth, Walter's great-niece, who'd been born after his death. She discovered her connection to our story through genealogy research and came, bearing a trunk of Stanley Krashevsky's papers that had been in her mother's attic. "I never knew great-uncle Walter," she said, "but his choice shaped my life. When I learned about the basement, about his decision, I changed my major from business to social work. I couldn't build a career on profit knowing he'd chosen principle." The papers she brought included more of Stanley's journal, revealing deeper anguish than we'd previously understood. One entry, dated 1953, read, "The gold multiplies in the darkness. Each bar grows heavier. I dream of skeletal hands reaching from the concrete. I've become what I fought against, a thief of the dead. But I'm too coward to confess, too weak to repair. I pray my nephew will be stronger." This prayer, answered decades later by Walter's courage, reminded us that redemption often skips generations, waiting for someone strong enough to break the cycle. The symposium concluded with the dedication of a new memorial, not a statue or plaque, but a living center where families could research their histories and receive support for restitution efforts. The Krashevsky Center for Historical Justice would provide free genealogical research, legal assistance, counseling services, and connection to global networks of conscience. Emma cut the ribbon with the same scissors Walter had used in his workshop, another layer of symbolism, tools of creation severing the bonds of concealment. As the ribbon fell, hundreds of butterflies were released, each tagged with the name of a Holocaust victim whose stolen possessions had been returned through our efforts. The butterflies dispersed across Pittsburgh's sky, carrying names back into the light. Some landed on participants, brief blessings before continuing their journey. One, tagged with the name Sarah Rosen, possibly the daughter of Abraham Rosen, who'd written to Stanley, landed on my shoulder and stayed for several minutes. "She approves," someone whispered. That evening, at the closing banquet, we announced a new initiative. Emma and I had been working with tech companies to develop an AI system that could match recovered items with victim databases, dramatically accelerating the restitution process. The technology, offered free to any organization doing this work, had already identified over 10,000 connections in testing. Walter believed in using the right tools for the job. I explained. Today's tools are different, but the job remains the same, returning what was stolen, healing what was broken. A young programmer named David Kim demonstrated the system, showing how a photograph of a single ring could be matched against thousands of historical records in minutes. What once took months of research could now happen almost instantaneously. We named the system Walter, David revealed, wartime asset location through ethical recognition. It seemed appropriate. The announcement drew standing ovations, but also thoughtful questions about privacy, accuracy, and the risks of automation in such sensitive matters. We'd anticipated these concerns, building in human oversight and ethical guidelines developed with Holocaust scholars and survivors. The years following the 20th anniversary saw exponential growth in basement discoveries. The combination of publicity, technology, and social acceptance created conditions where concealment became harder to maintain than disclosure. In Munich, construction workers found a chamber beneath the city library containing thousands of books stolen from Jewish libraries. The discovery led to the creation of a new wing dedicated to Jewish literature and scholarship. In Buenos Aires, a family renovating their grandmother's house discovered not gold, but meticulous records she'd been a secretary for a Nazi smuggling network, and had documented every transaction. The records helped locate dozens of stolen artwork pieces in private collections worldwide. In New York, a Wall Street executive discovered his firm's seed money had come from Holocaust assets laundered through Swiss banks. He chose to liquidate his shares and donate the proceeds, despite personal financial ruin. His example inspired similar reviews across the financial sector. Each discovery added to our understanding of how deeply the theft had penetrated post-war society. It wasn't just basements holding secrets, it was banks, museums, private collections, and family fortunes built on hidden foundations of blood. Emma's work at the clinic evolved beyond treating childhood cancer. She established a program for treating inherited trauma, recognizing that the children of those who'd hidden family secrets often carried psychological wounds. The body remembers what the mind forgets, she explained in a medical journal article. Children raised in homes with significant secrets show increased rates of anxiety, depression, and autoimmune disorders. Truth isn't just morally healing, it's physically healing. Her research partner, Dr. James Park, had his own basement story. His Korean grandfather had collaborated with Japanese forces during World War II, accumulating wealth through betraying resistance fighters. The family had never acknowledged this history until James discovered documents while settling his father's estate. The shame was literally making us sick, James revealed. 3 generations of Park men died young from heart disease. Since we've acknowledged the truth and made reparations, my blood pressure has normalized. My son sleeps through the night. Confession really is good for the body as well as the soul. Together, Emma and James published groundbreaking research on the physiological effects of historical disclosure, proving what we'd suspected, that carrying secrets creates measurable stress on human bodies across generations. The work attracted criticism from those who felt we were pathologizing privacy or creating mandatory confession culture. Emma addressed these concerns thoughtfully. We're not saying every family secret needs exposure. We're saying that secrets involving harm to others, particularly systematic historical harm, create ripples that affect descendants' health. Healing requires acknowledgement. As Emma's reputation grew, she received an unexpected invitation to address the German Bundestag on the 30th anniversary of reunification. The invitation came specifically because of her unique perspective as someone saved by Return Nazi Gold. Her speech, delivered in careful German she'd studied for months, challenged the nation. You've done much to acknowledge the Holocaust, but acknowledgement without ongoing action is merely historical theater. How many basements remain unopened? How many family fortunes rest on unexamined foundations? My life proves that confronting these questions saves lives, literally. The speech sparked a national initiative in Germany, with the government offering amnesty and support for families voluntarily disclosing wartime assets. Within a year, over 500 million euros in assets were identified and redirected to survivor funds and medical research. One disclosure stood out. Klaus Müller, whose grandfather had been a high-ranking SS officer, revealed an entire warehouse of stolen artwork his family had hidden for 70 years. The collection, worth over 100 million euros, included pieces thought lost forever. My children asked me what their great-grandfather did in the war, Klaus explained. I couldn't lie anymore. They deserve a clean inheritance, not one painted with blood. His teenage daughter, Anna, became an advocate for her generation, starting a movement called Clean Hands for young Germans confronting family histories. Their symbol, Hands Washed in Truth, appeared on t-shirts and social media across Europe. The movement spread beyond Germany. In Poland, Ukraine, France, and across Europe, young people began asking uncomfortable questions about family wealth and wartime activities. Resulting discoveries rewrote portions of post-war history. Not all reactions were positive. In several countries, nationalist movements pushed back against what they called guilt culture and ancestor shaming. Some families who disclosed secrets faced harassment or violence from those who preferred silence. Emma received death threats after her Bundestag speech. Security became necessary at the clinic, a sad reminder that choosing truth creates enemies among those who profit from lies. But she refused to be silenced. They threaten us because we threaten them, she said. Every basement open makes their own concealment harder to maintain. The threats escalated after Emma testified at the trial of Viktor Orbán Jr., son of a Hungarian politician who'd been caught trying to sell Holocaust gold on the black market. Her testimony about the medical miracles funded by restituted assets helped secure his conviction. During the trial, a shocking revelation emerged. Orbán Jr. wasn't acting alone. He was part of a network that had been systematically locating and emptying hidden caches before families could discover them. They'd stolen from the already stolen, creating layers of crime that boggled investigators. The network's exposure led to the recovery of nearly $1 billion in assets they'd accumulated. In a fitting irony, these funds were distributed to the very programs the criminals had tried to prevent restitution efforts and medical research. I was called to testify about our original discovery, sitting in the same chair where Emma had testified. 25 years after breaking through that concrete, I could see how far the ripples had spread. Mr. Krashevsky showed us that individuals can choose differently than their ancestors. I testified that courage can skip generations but still arrive. That one hammer strike in a basement can crack open decades of denial. The prosecutor asked if I regretted the chain of events our discovery had set in motion, given the complications and conflicts it had created. I regret nothing, I answered, except perhaps that Walter isn't here to see how his courage multiplied. Every conflict created by truth is preferable to the false peace of concealment. As the years passed, our story became a standard case study in ethics courses worldwide. Students debated the choices made, the paths taken, the ongoing implications. Some criticized our decisions, arguing we should have kept quiet for Emma's sake or handled things privately. These debates pleased me. Each argument meant another generation grappling with the questions rather than ignoring them. Emma often guest lectured in these classes, her very presence alive, healthy, dedicated to healing others, serving as the ultimate counterargument to those who said we should have kept the gold. One student asked her, "If you could go back, knowing your life depended on that gold, would you want your father to make a different choice?" Emma's answer came without hesitation. "My life built on hidden blood would have been no life at all. I'm grateful my father and Walter valued my integrity more than my mere survival. They saved more than my body, they saved my ability to look at myself without shame." The medical advances, funded by restitution money, continued to compound. The specific treatment that saved Emma had evolved through 3 generations of improvement, each more effective than the last. Thousands of children now lived because of research funded by returned assets. Dr. Sarah Kim, who developed the latest protocol, kept a photograph of Walter in her lab. "He never knew his choice would lead to this specific discovery," she said. But ethical choices create possibilities we can't foresee. Every child we save carries forward his decision to choose right over rich. The Pittsburgh Park, built over Walter's basement, became a pilgrimage site of sorts. On any given day, you might find Holocaust survivors saying Kaddish, families who'd returned assets seeking peace, or children whose lives were saved by restitution funds playing on the equipment. The city installed a unique memorial, a transparent floor section where visitors could look down into a symbolic basement. Instead of gold bars, the space held mirrors, forcing viewers to confront their own reflection among the shadows. "We all have basements," the plaque read. "What we do when we find them defines us." Emma and I often met there, especially on the anniversary of the discovery. We'd sit on Walter's bench, watching life flourish where secrets once festered. The symbolism never grew old. Death transformed to life, darkness to light, curse to blessing. On the 25th anniversary, we held a special ceremony. Emma, now director of an international network of clinics, announced that the millionth child had been treated through programs funded by restituted Holocaust assets. 1 million children, she said, her voice breaking. 1 million futures created from returned pasts. 1 million proofs that choosing conscience over comfort multiplies miracles. The millionth child, a boy from Rwanda named Patrick, had been flown in for the ceremony. His cancer, identical to what Emma had faced, was in complete remission thanks to treatments developed through decades of restitution-funded research. Patrick read a poem he'd written, "From darkness, gold. From gold, confession. From confession, healing. From healing, life. From life, more life. More life, more life." His young voice, carrying across the park where evil had been transformed to good, reminded us why every difficult choice had been worth making. That evening, at a private dinner for families involved in the restitution movement, I found myself sitting with Gerhard Hoffmann, whose story had recently made headlines. His family owned one of Germany's largest manufacturing companies, built on patents stolen from Jewish engineers. For 80 years, we told ourselves we were industrialists, job creators, pillars of society, Gerhard said. Your story made me question what pillars we were actually standing on. His decision to return the patent's value nearly 2 billion euros had sent shockwaves through German industry. Other companies were now reviewing their own histories, terrified of being the next revelation, but equally terrified of the weight of continued concealment. My children thank me, Gerhard continued. They say I gave them something more valuable than wealth, the ability to build their own success without blood beneath it. This was perhaps the most profound change. A generation rising that understood clean foundations mattered more than grand structures. They were choosing harder paths, but walking them with lighter steps. Emma's daughter, Sarah, named for my late wife, now 5 years old, attended the dinner. She'd grown up knowing her mother's story, understanding that her very existence depended on moral choices made before her birth. "Grandpa," she said, climbing onto my lap, "Mommy says you found gold that wasn't yours and gave it back." "That's right, sweetheart. And that's why Mommy could grow up and have me? In a way, yes." She thought about this with the seriousness only small children can muster. "So I exist because you did the right thing?" The simple clarity of her understanding took my breath away. "Yes, Sarah, you exist because of doing the right thing." "Then I'll do right things too," she declared, "so more people can exist." Around the table, hardened adults dabbed at their eyes. From the mouths of babes, the entire moral universe distilled to its essence. The conversation turned to future challenges. Climate change, reparations, colonial wealth, modern slavery, all the basements civilization had yet to fully open. Our small story of Nazi gold had become a template for confronting larger historical debts. "We've proven it's possible," said Dr. Jennifer Martinez, who'd left a lucrative career to run a foundation tracing colonial assets. "Individual choices can cascade into systemic change. Every basement open makes the next one easier." Emma proposed a toast as the evening concluded, to Walter Kraszewski, who showed us basements could be opened, to all who followed his example, and to those still gathering courage, may you find it soon. We raised our glasses, water and juice, nothing stronger, keeping clear heads for clear choices. The clink of glass on glass sounded like hammers on concrete, breaking through to truth. Later, walking home through Pittsburgh's quiet streets, I reflected on the journey from that desperate October night to this moment of multi-generational impact. The $10 basement had become priceless, not for what it contained, but for what it revealed about human capacity for transformation. Emma walked beside me, her daughter asleep in her arms. "Do you think Walter knew?" she asked, echoing her frequent question. "Could he have imagined all this?" "I think," I said slowly, "he knew that right choices create ripples. He couldn't see where they'd spread, but he trusted they'd spread somewhere good." We passed the site of another recently discovered basement, now being excavated under the Hartman Protocol. Yellow tape marked the scene, but it felt more like birth than crime, another secret preparing to transform into truth. "Sarah asked me yesterday why some people hide things," Emma said. "I didn't know how to explain it in terms a 5-year-old could understand." "What did you tell her?" "That sometimes people are scared. But being scared doesn't mean you have to stay scared. You can choose to be brave instead. Like Walter, like you. Like everyone who's opened a basement since." We reached Emma's house, a modest home she'd chosen, despite being able to afford much more. "Clean living in a clean house," she'd say when people questioned her choice. As I prepared to leave, Emma hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Dad, for that night, for that choice, for everything that followed." "Thank Walter," I said, as I always did. "I do," she replied. Every day. Walking home alone, I passed the hospital where Emma had been treated, now vastly expanded with wings funded by restitution money. The lights in the children's ward glowed softly, each window representing a fight for life supported by transformed death. I thought of all the basements, literal and metaphorical, still waiting to be opened. The work was far from over. New secrets were probably being buried, even as old ones were exposed. Human nature hadn't fundamentally changed, but our tools for confronting that nature had evolved. We'd created pathways from darkness to light, communities of conscience, technologies of truth. Most importantly, we'd proven that transformation was possible, one choice at a time. My phone buzzed with a message from David Hartman, new discovery in Cleveland. Family wants to do the right thing but needs guidance. Can you talk to them? Of course I could. This was the work now helping others navigate the path Walter had first shown us. Each conversation, another link in the chain of conscience he'd started. I called the Cleveland family that night. They were terrified, confused, ashamed of their grandfather's theft, but equally ashamed of benefiting from it for decades. The same moral anguish I'd felt 25 years ago, fresh in new hearts. It feels impossible, the woman said. How do we undo 80 years of wrong? You don't undo it, I told her. You transform it. You choose truth over treasure. And then you watch miracles multiply from that choice. I walked them through the process, legal, emotional, spiritual. By call's end, they were still scared but no longer paralyzed. Another basement would open. Another family would be freed from the weight of secrets. This was Walter's true legacy, not just the single choice he made, but the pattern he created for others to follow. He'd shown that ordinary people could make extraordinary moral choices, that courage was contagious, that truth really could set you free. As I prepared for bed, I looked at Walter's photograph on my nightstand. The image was fading now, colors surrendering to time. But his eyes remained clear, the eyes of a man who'd chosen conscience over comfort and found peace in that choice. Still rippling, Walter, I whispered, still spreading, still saving lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new basements, new opportunities for transformation. The work would continue as long as humans had the capacity to hide and heal. But tonight, I slept peacefully, knowing that somewhere a child lived because we'd chosen truth. Somewhere a family was free because we'd broken concrete. Somewhere light grew because we'd refused to let darkness win. The $10 basement was long gone, but its lessons lived in every choice to reveal rather than conceal. In every child treated at clinics funded by truth. In every family freed from generational shame. In every hammer raised against concrete that shouldn't be there. This is how the world changes, one basement at a time, one choice at a time, one conscience at a time, refusing to let evil have the last word. Walter showed us it could be done. Emma proves it was worth doing. And tomorrow, someone else will pick up a hammer and choose transformation over concealment. The ripples continue. The work goes on. The basements keep opening. And somewhere, I'm certain, Walter smiles. Click subscribe to hear more incredible true stories of hidden treasures and moral choices. Tomorrow's story will explore another family's confrontation with inherited secrets and the courage required to transform shame into healing.